Hello, Kim. Welcome to the Dublin Conversations. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Kim Blanchette. I'm the Senior Vice President for Argyle, one of Canada's fastest growing management owned engagement, communications, and reputation firms. I grew up in Halifax, Nova Scotia on Canada's East Coast. Now I live, work, and play here in Calgary, Alberta, which is home to Treaty 7, the Blackfoot Confederacy, and Region 3 of the Métis Nation. And yeah, just really excited to be here and have this conversation today.
Okay, welcome there. Let's begin our conversation, and we've got a slideshow up here. Okay, so the context is that we're witnessing a paradox change in the communications industry of greater fragmentation and convergence, and we need to rethink established ideas like advertising, journalism, marketing, PR, and more. And yet we've got immense new knowledge that we can inform our thinking, and by co-creating new ideas we can come up with a better way of doing our jobs better and rise to challenges of growing distrust, tribalism, or not being able to come together to tackle our big challenges in society. So what if we could unlearn some of our existing thinking, discarding ineffective, outdated ideas while embracing fresh concepts and new insights? And this is the purpose behind the 5 steps to the Dublin window, to enable all of us to sort of see a bigger world from which we can then develop new thinking. So our first step is step 1. At the moment is about we liken the current attempts to say or previous attempts to define things like public relations advertising have suffered. It's been like, say, the early astronomers who tried to define their universe with themselves at the center of it. And so we believe that actually at the center of a universe we operate in is the need to be have purpose and have purposefulness. And we believe that actually the need to create confidence, to coexist, cooperate, or collaborating is one of the most fundamental of human functions. After like breathing, eating, using your senses, you need to manage how you perceive yourself and how others perceive you. So we believe at the root of this is confidence. It's not self-confidence, but a confidence in its statistical sense of the probability of its likelihood of being happening and real. And so we look at different dimensions of confidence, and we believe that purpose and purposefulness makes it easier to create confidence by being more coherent and compelling. I just want to give Kim any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I feel like I've spent my whole career on this slide. Having before I came to Argyle in 2019, I spent my entire career working for the public service, so working for provincial and federal governments across Canada on everything from taxation, economic development. And my last job was I spent a decade as the vice president of communications for the Alberta Energy Regulator, so the regulatory body responsible for managing oil and gas development, coal development, public safety, environmental and enforcement matters. And every organization I went to, they're always obsessed about trust. How do we get people to trust us? We need trust. And from a regulatory perspective, from a public service perspective, I always veered away from trust. I always felt trust, like happiness, is an outcome, and the pursuit of it can often result in the opposite of what you're trying to achieve. And for me, it was always confidence. It was always, as a regulator, were Albertans confident in our ability to keep them safe, protect the environment, and enforce the rules? That was our purpose. That was why we existed. And the extent to which we could explain that we understood that purpose, how we articulated that we met that purpose, and got that confidence from Albertans, then we could say, ultimately you may get to trust. But it was always about, that having that relationship with the people that you
Yeah.
serve, or your customers, or your stakeholders, or your audiences. And when we shifted our thinking from trust to confidence, it became a really interesting dynamic. It was no longer hand wringing. Why doesn't the public trust us? We didn't focus on every single criticism. We didn't focus on every piece of information that we had to jump into. And we really returned to our purpose. What was our mandate? What was our mission? What are we there to achieve and to do? What's our reason for being? And let's make sure that we are communicating that in every single decision we make, in every interaction. And in doing that, not only did we exude confidence, because we weren't running around, apologizing for imagined issues, but we were really staying in our swim lane and providing the public that we served with that absolute focus on what was important to them. And I think in doing that, in for me, it really changed my focus on trust to confidence. On when you look at I'm sure we'll talk about the difference between brand and reputation, but by focusing on confidence, whether that's as a personal professional that I bring to the table with my with the clients that I serve, or with organizations, I think it really created a better basis to have a relationship with those we serve. And ultimately, that's what PR is about. It's about those relationships. And that's, I think, what differentiates us from marketing or social media or other pieces. It really is about creating that lasting tie to your audiences.
It's interesting now because what you're describing, your use of confidence, is very different from the tendency of many people to sort of define confidence. Really, what they are saying is self-confidence. So it's interesting this sort of distinction you make there. And
Absolutely, and that's what you want, especially in crisis. I mean, we see the fallout of a lack of confidence. We see that, with the horrific shooting in the United States, the school shooting in the
yeah,
United States, and you see that, that dismantling of confidence in the police, confidence in the city council, in that community. This lack of confidence that there something fundamental is your children being safe going to school and being protected by the police. So you see, once that starts to fray, it can be really difficult. And you can have confidence sometimes without trust. Working for the Alberta Energy Regulator, working with, Indigenous communities in Canada and in Alberta, trust wasn't always there. I mean, trust you have to earn, but you could demonstrate that you were doing your job, that you were fulfilling your mandate, that you're, keeping the commitments you made to the community, to at least get confidence. And so we always felt that confidence, if we had, I think we had probably 85% of Albertans confident in the regulator's ability to deliver on its mandate, that was way stronger than, do I trust the regulator, which is a very charged question.
and then moving on then to our next stage about them. So influenced by the work of behavioural psychologists like Professor Daniel Kahneman, who identifies that people are emotionally driven, yet we can connect with each other. And we've got into what we call the 5 rules, rules of thumb, or what are known as heuristics. And that by achieving one or more of these 5 rules, you're more likely to be successful in connecting with others, of being known and noticed, liked, trusted, front of mind, being talked about. And like, for example, can be more than just affective liking, but respect and admired, and even the contrary, that you may like not to like someone. And we believe this provides a sort of a framework for any campaign. Just wondering, any thoughts on this tool at all, this framework, Kim?
Yeah, I mean, I like this, and I think again, it's interesting seeing it in a circle. I've always used it as almost a pyramid with that, that awareness.
Yeah.
I've always called it awareness, familiarity, and moving up. So that being known, somebody knowing who you are, being familiar with you. There's a lot of study around high performing teams and trust and confidence, and that coming from intimacy. I have to know who you are before I'm going to make that emotional
No.
investment in you, whether you're a person or a brand or a company. What I find interesting is the being talked about, because that can be in a positive sphere or a negative sphere. And I guess
No.
one of the most recent examples, and I don't know why, I presented at a conference the other day. I said, I'm not a golfer, but I don't know why all of my reputation examples lately seem to be about golf. But I've been really fascinated by the fallout of the golfers that have joined the Live tournament. And seeing how golfers who we're known and noticed, we're liked, we're trusted, we're front of mind, we're being talked about. And now you've got this division of 2 sets of golfers that are both being talked about, some in terms of the decision that they chose to make, by joining the Live tournament, the fallout with
Yeah.
that, the loss of sponsorship, because if you remove yourself from the PGA Tour, and potentially rumors have it, some of the other tours will be kicking them out as well. Well, you've lost your value to advertisers. You're no longer front of mind. You're no longer being talked about. The trust level is no longer there. It's there's no secret that professional athletes get paid a lot of money for what they do.
Yeah.
But what keeps the fantasy alive for many sports fans is that there's a dedication to the sport, there's a dedication to the fans, a dedication to the team, and when that is fractured, there's a pushback. And so I think this, the being talked about can really turn all of these other elements against you if you're not living in a way that is purposeful, if you're not true to the brand that you've put out there, if you're not engendering the confidence of people. So I think this is great as a frame of what you need to do to interact. It's a really good diagnostic tool, I believe, as well, when things aren't going well for an
Yeah.
organization or a person or a brand, where you can look at this and say, oh, we might have a couple of these elements. We might be known,
Yeah.
front of mind, and talked about, but we're missing trusted and liked. And why is that? And what is it that we're doing? And how are we showing up in a way that is making those two elements elusive?
So it's both a platform for projecting oneself, but also a tool for listening better and discerning the different elements within what you're listening to give you a scope for more accurate responses, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And moving on then to another framework, which is the opens choices. And this is an evolution of the PESO model, but with some profound difference in that, firstly, they're not channels, but choices that identify how you can connect with others. So, for example, own is not much more than own media channels, but your own reputation. You mentioned earlier about reputation and brand, your own character, your own behaviors, even like spending time with someone can be a tool for earning trust. And a new dimension in the mix there of nudge about how you make choices easier so you can influence behaviors without even communicating with people. So the framework there of opens provides a framework for helping guiding how you connect with others. Any thoughts on this at all, Kim?
I think I was really excited when I first saw this, because I think when we look at the work that we're all doing in this study, and in behavior modification, behavioral change through communications, it's so important. At Argyle, we have a social change practice, and we
Yeah.
we work across Canada on everything from tobacco cessation, public health. Harm reduction around alcohol and drug use, sexual health, all of these things come with that nudge element, and to see it formalized, to see it really clear as one of the choices you have when communicating and building those relationships, I think is so important. And I think to not have that, I think runs the risk, and back to your first slide, of the constant change and being
Yeah.
live to how the industry continues to evolve, and how human relationships evolve, and how our expectations of each other and organizations evolve. That nudge is so very important. And I believe that nudges both ways. You see the power of the consumer, the power of social media is nudging big organizations and big brands, to make different decisions, and especially in social justice issues. You look at, the initial reaction of Starbucks and McDonald's to, Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, and they dug their heels in and said, well, we're not leaving Russia. We have all these good reasons. And it did not take long for, a global population of consumers to nudge those companies
Mm.
in the direction that they felt was the right choice, to keep their brand loyalty, and to keep the business. So I find it interesting how that nudge really, because ultimately communications, when done well, is a two way construct. I mean,
Yeah.
since we've moved away from press agentry, we've moved away from that push out communications, and
Yeah.
as that relationship deepens, I think as the industry evolves, there's a requirement that we actually respond to what we're hearing, as well as push out information that might change
Yeah.
behavior.
I'll comment a bit more about that. Some interesting points again. So step 4 is that our world is shaped by what's known as emergence rather than through design. And a very simple, elegant little model created by Professor Gareth Loudon of Imperial College London called the Listen, Connect, Do, that it describes really how we think and act by listening, and listening in its broadest sense of all the senses. We then connect this, and then do can be development of an idea or an implementation in some form, and it's continual dynamic driven by purpose at its center. And really, in our world of emergence, one label has emerged called comms, which is widely used but doesn't have any sort of formal definition. And so the Dublin Conversation proposes that we need a label that describes a bigger world of practice that goes beyond existing disciplines, and comms could be a candidate, with a proposed definition of how you create confidence within yourself and with others to exist, coexist, cooperate or collaborate by managing perceptions around your future behaviours, which is fundamental to being purposeful. I just want any thoughts there, Kim, on A, the need for a definition, if there is one, and B, this proposed draft.
Is there any industry that has redefined itself more than public relations? I think
Yeah.
it's probably a nature of the work that we do, that we're constantly coming back to that terminology. I have to admit, I've always preferred the label comms or communication. That's always been something I've gravitated to, and perhaps that's because it was never just an external PR construct. The work I did, I was always doing internal and employee communications. I was doing stakeholder community relations as part of that work. In some cases, I was doing government relations. In some cases, it was advocacy work. And I always felt comms was just a better way of, ultimately, communicating, building relationships that served the mission and vision of the organization I was working with. And so I think, having comms, and I love that piece in terms of, not just within yourself, but, how you coexist. And that collaboration. And we're at Argyle, we do an annual study on the relationships index. And so there we're diving into what are the key elements between Canadians and their relationships with their employers or with specific brands or institutions. So we've done it, for example, with municipal governments, or we've done it with banking institutions, to find out what is it about these organizations that either engender trust and confidence, or that where those organizations or sectors are failing. And over, what we're seeing, especially in the public engagement space, is that opportunity to collaborate, that opportunity to influence decisions. People no longer just want to be a sounding board for communications messaging. It really is moving away even from two-way communications to that co-creation, to that collaboration. And that's what's expected. And so I really like how this moves in terms of, coexist, cooperate, collaborate. That changes the power dynamic. And that brings your audiences, your stakeholders, your consumers into the conversation in a way that I think also links into James McNamara's work, right? Truly getting to organizational listening, not listening just so that you can, spit out some refined messages, but really taking in what you're hearing and being invested in that relationship with the people in your ecosystem to create that confidence and create that, if you're lucky, shared purpose.
Yeah. And a further dimension to emergence, sociology, from the work of sociology, sociologists can now sort of do experiments to almost establish like universal laws of human behavior. One of which is that 2 out of 3 people will help a stranger, which also means 1 out of 3 don't. And it's not to make a moral judgment there, but to identify sort of what the Dublin Conversation believes are 2 prime instincts that drive behaviors in our society. One of we-led thinking, where your immediate response is to think of the others first, the communal good above your own, and me-led thinking, where it's about self-interest first. And we believe that there's potential here to develop a philosophy, an attitude of a public relations approach, perhaps based on we-led thinking, and advertising based on me-led thinking. Any thoughts on that sort of idea?
Yeah, although I think you can, I mean, I think you can dip into me-led thinking in public relations as well, depending on the issue and
Yeah,
depending, and in some cases, I mean, that's a real challenge, whether it's for us in the communication side or in the engagement side. The we-led is often it's the easier messaging. But to take something that's abstract or take something that's for the greater good and drill it down into the
yeah,
what's in it for me is often the challenge. I think that's often where we see pushback on, public engagement, whether it's on social justice issues or infrastructure or something seemingly as simple as, where to put a cell phone tower. The we led says no, this we need better connectivity. It makes sense to put the cell phone tower here. The me led becomes, but there's now a risk to me. So how do you get somebody from a me led perspective? How do you use that nudge element? How do you use those channels? How do you build that confidence to get a person that's rooted in that to a place? And I do think that that can be done through that collaboration, that understanding, that deepening of a relationship. You're not going to get everybody, and you're not going to get it, get them to 100%, but you might get them to a point where that me-led thinking is not so prevalent, so front of mind that that there's an opposition to everything. And some of that me-led, I think, comes from a lack, a feeling that I'm not being heard, that I'm not being considered. That decisions are made without me. And I think we see that a lot in the polarization of politics these days. That's me led thinking. That's, my needs are not being met. And rather than, look at that on the news and shake our head and cluck our tongues and say, oh my gosh, those people are awful, because they don't believe what I believe. The only way through that is to understand, to listen, to understand, to build a relationship and really find out what is at the root of that me-led thinking, because I think often it's fear.
yeah. So there's some validity in the concepts and an interesting insight there about how it can be applied to practice.
Mhm.
We'll move on to the next stage of step 5 in that this is inspired by the work of Professor Jim McNamara in Australia, where he identified a trust spectrum from being distrustful and disengaged at one end to being over trusting in the other end, and where you can be that, like, this is the foundation zone for at least being naive, but also for prejudice and bias. And the Dublin conversation labels this middle area called a purposeful trust zone, which is the vital resource, the glue that enables our society to function, that enables social cohesion, and we cannot coexist, cooperate, or collaborate without it. That you need this minimum level of trust in others and being open to understanding others in order to work together. And so the Dublin conversation believes in communication practice. You not only need to both earn confidence, but also invest in social cohesion. We've coined the term regenerative comms that seeks to both earn confidence and replenish and enhance purposeful trust and the wider social fabric that holds society together. Any thoughts about this idea of purposeful trust and this sort of double barrel approach to how we connect with others?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very connected to the last slide, and talking about that being able to understand others, and a deeper understanding, not again understanding as far as you need to convince them or to sell them on what it is you need to do. I apologize for the giant truck driving by outside my window. I think what I like about this is, you can be skeptical and still in the purposeful trust zone. I like the way that it's not creating, this Pollyanna state where it's all optimism. It's all you can still have that trust. In fact, it's even more important to have people that will challenge your ideas and challenge perceptions. Again, it's that social cohesion, and I think that's where we need to get to. I like the idea too of replenishment, because I think too many organizations, they earn, they think earning trust or earning confidence is the goal. that's actually the easier part. Keeping it is tougher, and keeping it requires you to go back and replenish, not just do the same thing you've done for 20 years, because the world changes. And so I think we see that. We see organizations again struggling, making decisions that they were making 10 years ago that was, putting them on the pedestal of some of the best organizations in the world. And now they're under fire because they just haven't aged well. They haven't, brought in new voices. They haven't taken those distrusting voices and those pessimistic voices and brought them into the engaged space. And to do that, I think requires organizations to be a little bit vulnerable, which is always really, really difficult for any organization. There's a misperception that confidence or exuding confidence means you've got all the answers, you've got it all together, but you can be, very confident and at the same time expose that vulnerability, seek out answers and solutions from other people that may not be in your sphere or in your audience. So I think that's, really, really helpful. One of the exciting things we get to do at Argyle through our public engagement is often seeking out people, that aren't part of the social discourse normally.
Yeah.
So really seeking out those equity deserving groups, seeking out people that, for whether they don't have the means or they don't have the opportunity to be part of decisions that impact them. And it's amazing to me how richer the conversation is, how much better the feedback is when you can do that. But that means, talking to people at all stages of this continuum. And it's not always as fun talking to people on the left-hand side of that continuum. But it's so very important. And so I really think that, that commitment to keep replenishing, to keep asking yourselves those tough questions and asking the people around you those tough questions is really going to be important to having that purposeful trust.
I like this idea almost of you mentioned about vulnerability, almost like a vulnerable confidence. That it's a confidence not based on bravado, but I mean, one of the greatest strengths I believe is knowing one's weaknesses. And so, as I say, I think that's a very powerful insight there about sharing the confidence to share open your vulnerabilities, because there's a deeper rooted confidence maybe around your purpose, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, we
So,
spoke earlier about, confidence without purpose is bravado.
yeah,
If you're not linked to your purpose, then and people will see through that really quickly. It's
yeah.
I've always said too, it's I equate it to kindness, where I see like benevolence is not compassionate kindness. Benevolence is bestowing things from a position of power, and getting into that purposeful trust zone may mean for companies today, for organizations today, ceding some of that power to those around them to in you know to invest in that relationship. And that is really, really difficult for organizations to hear. It is a real shift in thinking. It's a real shift in handing over some of that power to the people in your community. But the benefits are so huge. But it's still early days for that kind of thinking, and I think those that pioneer that kind of thinking will succeed in the long run. But it's tough. It's tough for organizations to hear.
So the idea of purposeful trust, where there's a greater good, a greater bank of goodwill and need, and so you could argue, from what you said there, that you actually become more powerful by ceding power because you're investing in the underlying fabrics and ecosystem that enables you to survive in the first place. So fascinating work. And I really want to conclude our journey with like the 5 steps where it enables you to sort of step out of existing labels of PR, advertising, communication, so on. Do you feel more confident about addressing this question of what does better look like?
I think I do. I think especially when it's ambiguous. I think I feel more comfortable with ambiguity, with not having the answers, and helping organizations understand that they may not have those answers. But if you can root yourself, in in purpose, if you can root yourself in earning confidence, if you can focus on that, you'll get there. You don't need all the answers today. You know, we do a lot of work in crisis communications with clients across North America, and you, in the middle of a crisis, you can't have all the information. You don't have all the risks, so you do have to get back to those principles of, you know, of confidence, of purpose, of trust, of vulnerability, um, of transparency, to make your way through that, regardless of what the crisis is about. So I think I feel much more comfortable actually, um, with having an idea of what better looks like, but not always having all the answers on how to get there.
So that's sort of being comfortable about being uncomfortable in this age of volatility, uncertainty, and complexity, and is a critical asset to have. You've been familiar with the work of the Dublin Conversations. Is there anything we should be doing different?
I think it's not different. I think it's just being able to amplify and expand. I think it's really really important, and many of us in this work, you know, have our heads down. We don't get this opportunity to discuss what we do, why we do it, our own purpose in it, and you know, the work that we've done in Canada in through the purpose workshops, participating with some of the work that Dublin Conversations is doing, I think has you know, just, it's almost relit a fire for those of us that participated. You know, the passion for what we do, it takes you out of the, you know, the daily slog of the tactics and back into, you know, the ultimate purpose, which is, you know, improving those relationships between organizations and those they serve. So I think in terms of that, in terms of the action items to take, I think it's just getting our voice out there, you know, bringing more people into the conversation, to just make it richer and broader.
And I love your metaphor of relighting the fire. So thank you very much for lighting this fire here, and many more to come. So thank you, Kim. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy.